My name is Serafina Reyes, and for most of my life, the quiet landscapes of coastal Oregon were the only world I knew. I grew up in a small house overlooking the sea in Astoria, a town where the fog rolls in like a slow, gray thought and the skeletons of old canneries stand guard along the river. My father was a fisherman, his hands permanently smelling of salt and diesel, his silence as vast as the Pacific. My mother ran a little bookstore on Commercial Street, a place filled with the scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. It was a life of quiet rhythms, of tides and seasons. My sister, Isolde, was different. She was a storm surge to my gentle tide. While I found solace in the pages of books and the patterns of the waves, she craved the sharp lines of discipline, the clear call of duty. She was the one who ran drills on the beach, her commands cutting through the cries of the gulls. She was the one who, at 18, enrolled in the State Maritime Academy, her eyes set on a commission in the Coast Guard. They laughed when I left the university after only a year. Not a loud, cruel laugh, but the quiet, pitying kind that seeps into your bones. Too sensitive for the real world, my father murmured over his coffee. Isolde, already in her crisp uniform during a visit home, called me driftwood, something pretty but aimless, washed up on the shore with no purpose. At family dinners, they would raise their glasses to her latest commendation, her newest certification, while I became part of the wallpaper, my presence acknowledged only when someone needed the salt passed. Even when I found my own path, a quiet enlistment, a specialized track so far off the main road it didn't have a signpost, they saw it as a phase. "Oh, she's playing at service now," I overheard my mother telling a neighbor on the phone, her voice laced with a weary sort of kindness that felt worse than scorn. But that day, standing on the observation deck at Coast Guard Training Center Petaluma, the California sun warm on my face and the 4 silver stars of an admiral tucked away in a discreet inner pocket of my civilian jacket, I watched Isolde drill a new class of cadets. She paced the asphalt, her voice sharp and clear, her posture a perfect, rigid line against the rolling green hills. She looked right past me, her gaze sweeping over the small crowd of observers without a flicker of recognition. Until her chief petty officer, a man whose face was a roadmap of sea tours and discipline, leaned in close to her. His eyes were wide with a kind of shock that bordered on reverence. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice tight, "the Admiral is here." The silence that fell over the training yard was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the sound from the air. The cadence of marching boots stopped mid-step. And for the first time, my sister truly saw me. Not as the dropout, not as the shadow haunting the edges of her success, but as someone she had never, not once, bothered to ask about. She didn't know about the years I'd spent under designations instead of a name, the operations I'd overseen from silent rooms thousands of miles away, the weight I carried that left no visible scars. And now, standing there in her perfect uniform, she was required, by every rule she lived and breathed, to salute me. But that isn't where the story truly begins. It begins in the silence, in the years I stayed away, and in the reasons I finally came back. Hello, I'm Serafina, and I've kept my story locked away for a long time, a ship in a bottle I was too afraid to break. But today, I'm ready to let it breathe. Before I share it, I just want to know you're with me. Just a simple listening in the comments, or maybe tell me what ocean you're closest to. I love knowing how far these words can travel. Sometimes, the smallest connection can make a story feel truly heard. And if any part of what I share resonates with you, please consider subscribing. Every single listener reminds me that no one's story is ever truly lost at sea. Thank you. And now, this is what happened. I guided my rental car down the familiar winding road, the tires crunching on the gravel of my childhood driveway just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in strokes of lavender and rose. The old brass porch light, shaped like a ship's lantern, still flickered with the same unsteady rhythm it always had, and the mailbox, a whimsical wooden whale my father had carved years ago, still listed slightly to one side, as if weary from facing the coastal winds. Astoria was hushed, the evening air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. In our small corner of the world, judgment was a currency traded in polite smiles and unspoken observations. Everyone knew everyone else's story, or at least, the version they'd agreed upon. And my version was one of quiet failure. The invitation, if one could call it that, had arrived as a text from my mother, as devoid of warmth as the winter sea. Isolde's promotion party Saturday. Please come. Don't wear anything odd. Not, we've missed you, not, I hope you're well, just a simple command, as if I were still a teenager being told to clear my plate. Stepping inside, I was met with the comforting, nostalgic scent of my mother's clam chowder and freshly baked sourdough. The dining room, however, felt less like home and more like a naval recruiting poster. Blue and gold streamers crisscrossed the ceiling. A professionally printed banner read, "Congratulations, Lieutenant Isolde Reyes." There were even little place cards with anchor motifs. No one looked up as I entered, not even Isolde. She was holding court by the fireplace, recounting a story about a rescue operation in the Bering Sea. I wore a simple charcoal gray cashmere sweater and dark jeans, nothing that could be construed as odd, just a quiet attempt to blend into the shadows. But in this house, I was never truly invisible. I was a known quantity, a gentle disappointment to be tolerated. My father was the first to acknowledge me, his eyes glancing over me as if I were a piece of furniture he'd forgotten was there. "Still doing that freelance research thing?" he asked, his tone flat, already turning his attention back to Isolde before I could form a reply. He launched into a proud retelling of her commendation for navigational excellence, his voice resonating with a pride I had never earned. My Aunt Helena, swirling a glass of Chardonnay, chimed in from her seat on the sofa. "I remember when you used to work at that little cafe in Portland. All that practice waitressing must come in handy," she said with a small, self-satisfied laugh. I offered a soft, placid smile. "It taught me a lot about serving people," I said. "And about knowing what they truly need, even when they don't ask for it." The comment landed with a gentle thud, polite, unassuming, but with a weight that would settle later, like silt at the bottom of a quiet river. As the toasts began, glasses raised to Isolde's bright future, my mother, with no trace of irony, asked me to bring out the extra dessert plates from the kitchen. No one offered to help. No one questioned the assumption. It was my role, long established, the helper, the afterthought, the one who had drifted away from the family's charted course. I performed the task in silence, the familiar weight of the ceramic plates in my hands a strange comfort. The rhythm of it was an old muscle memory: fetch, serve, retreat, observe. And all the while, my mind drifted back to the moment, a decade ago, when I had quietly packed a bag and left this house, my spirit fractured by a weight I couldn't articulate then. I had walked away from a full scholarship in marine biology after a quiet collapse that no one noticed because no one was looking. They had named it fragility, a lack of resolve. But none of them knew that 3 weeks later, I had accepted a position within a little-known branch of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, a civilian-led intelligence group called the Sentinel Program. My academic records were sealed, my identity assigned a clearance level instead of a name. I didn't vanish. I simply went deep. Back in the dining room, I stood by the doorway, holding the stack of plates. There was no chair for me at the table. Each seat was occupied, marked with a name card. My mother glanced up, her brow furrowing for a moment, as if trying to place a forgotten memory. "Oh, Serafina. Right. There's a stool in the kitchen. You can just sit by the counter." And so I did, perched on a wooden stool next to a bowl of lemons, the warmth of the oven at my back. Through the doorway, I watched Isolde laugh with our cousins, her uniform immaculate, her posture radiating confidence. Her eyes met mine once, just for a second, not with cruelty or even pity, but with a flicker of something conflicted, as if my presence was a dissonant note in the triumphant melody of her life. Then I felt it. A soft, insistent vibration against my hip from a device that looked like a simple river stone, smooth and gray, a piece of technology no one in this house would ever recognize. It was a slim, encrypted satellite communicator I kept on me at all times. I shielded its tiny screen with my hand and read the single line of text: Vanguard event. Report trace in Petaluma. Oversight required. Eyes only. A slow, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that evening. I powered down the device, slipped it back into the hidden pocket of my coat, and let my gaze drift to the meticulously arranged family photos on the mantelpiece. Isolde in her dress uniform. My parents flanking her at her academy graduation. A gallery of proud, smiling faces. There wasn't a single photo of me taken after my 16th birthday. Not one frame on that curated wall held my image. But that was all right, because I knew, with a quiet certainty that felt like the turning of the tide, that someday soon, when the right person stood before me and offered a salute earned in silence, every frame in this house would feel incomplete. And they would finally have to wonder about the picture that was missing. The sun was already casting long, golden fingers across the rolling hills of Sonoma County when I arrived at Petaluma. The air, unlike the salty dampness of Astoria, was dry and smelled of hay and eucalyptus. The rhythmic chant of cadence calls drifted on the morning breeze, a familiar heartbeat in a world I knew from a great distance. I parked the rental car in the visitor lot, passed through the main gate with a simple visitor's pass that bore no rank, no title, just a barcode that, when scanned, linked to a security file accessible to only 2 people on the entire West Coast. I was not there to be seen. I was there to observe. I wore a simple black blazer, tailored trousers, and low heels. My observer's badge was clipped to my lapel, intentionally nondescript. I found a seat in the second row of the guest bleachers, positioned behind a cluster of local dignitaries and a junior officer who was more interested in his phone than the drills. Isolde's company was assembled on the parade ground, standing in sharp formation under the watchful eye of Chief Petty Officer Elias Vance. I knew his file. A legend in the service, Vance was a man said to have once corrected a captain's salute during a formal inspection. He moved with a coiled energy, his voice a low growl that carried across the field, demanding and receiving absolute perfection. I watched, my presence as still and unobtrusive as the morning shadows. Then it happened. As Vance strode along the front line of cadets, his gaze swept the bleachers. His eyes, trained to notice every detail, every incongruity, brushed past the dignitaries, past the junior officer, and then stopped. On me. He froze for a single, almost imperceptible beat. His shoulders squared. In one fluid, decisive motion, he turned and marched directly toward the bleachers. The small crowd stirred, murmuring with confusion. The cadets held their formation, their eyes locked forward, but a ripple of tension passed through their ranks. Vance came to a halt directly in front of me, his boots clicking sharply on the pavement. He snapped to attention, his posture a study in deference, and raised his hand in a slow, perfect salute. "Admiral Reyes, ma'am," he said, his voice clear and resonant in the sudden quiet. "Your arrival was not on the morning brief." The silence that followed was so profound it felt like a physical force. Every cadet, every officer, every visitor froze. And Isolde, standing at the head of her formation, her back to me, slowly turned. I saw the confident set of her shoulders falter. I saw her hand, which had been resting on her hip, fall to her side. A cadet near her whispered, her voice carrying in the stillness, "Reyes? Her sister is an admiral." I met Chief Vance's gaze, my expression calm. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, not returning the salute, as is customary for an officer in civilian attire. "I'm here in a personal capacity today, Chief," I said, my voice low and even. "Please carry on." Keep this discreet. Vance's eyes flickered with understanding. He held the salute for another second, a silent acknowledgement of the hierarchy that transcended the moment, then dropped his hand, turned on his heel, and marched back to his position without a word of explanation to anyone. The drills resumed, but the atmosphere on the field had irrevocably changed. Glances were stolen in my direction. Whispers moved through the ranks like a phantom wind. By late morning, I had slipped away through a side exit, my observation complete. But the ripples were already spreading. The story moved through the barracks and mess halls with the speed of gossip fueled by disbelief. An admiral, out of uniform, with the same last name as the hard-charging Lieutenant Reyes. The ghost from the Sentinel program, a name most had only heard in whispers, a branch so secretive it was practically a myth. Isolde was no longer just the promising young officer. She was now the sister of a mystery, a high-ranking flag officer no one had ever seen. That night, long after lights out, she lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the image of Chief Vance's salute. The shock, the deference, the questions from her peers had been relentless. Did you know? Is she really an admiral? What does she do? But the truth was, she knew nothing. She had only ever known me as the quiet one, the drifter, the sister who had faded away when life got demanding. Now, that entire narrative had shattered. She remembered a small, heavy box I had given her for her birthday last year, telling her it was just some old research gear. She'd stored it in the bottom of her locker and forgotten about it. Driven by a need she couldn't name, she retrieved the box. Inside, nestled in foam, was not old gear but a small, slate-gray digital reader, no bigger than her palm. Frowning, she powered it on. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single, pulsing icon, a stylized compass rose. Beneath it, a line of text, Sentinel Archive. Clearance level, Omega. She hesitated, her heart beginning to pound. With a deep breath, she entered her own service credentials. The screen went dark for a second, then a new message appeared. Insufficient clearance. Temporary guest access granted. Logging initiated. The screen blinked. A soft chime echoed in the silent room. And then, for a fraction of a second before the device shut itself down, one more line of text flashed across the screen. Welcome, Lieutenant Reyes. It was 2:17 when my personal communicator vibrated, not with the gentle pulse of a standard update, but with a series of sharp, urgent bursts that signaled a high-level security alert. A code read. I was in a quiet hotel room in Sausalito, a place with a balcony overlooking the bay where the foghorns offered a lonesome, soothing melody. The air smelled of salt and night-blooming jasmine, but my mind was already miles away, back in the cold, sterile world of encrypted networks. Something was very wrong. I retrieved my primary encrypted tablet from the room's safe and decoded the alert. The message was stark, displayed in blocky, amber letters. Unauthorized archive ping. Origin. Tracen Petaluma. Guest node. Profile accessed. Reyes Echo. My breath caught. Reyes Echo. That was my original field designation, a call sign retired and digitally entombed nearly 8 years ago when I transitioned from active oversight to strategic direction. The system had automatically flagged the access attempt, a ghost stirring in the machine. But in doing so, it had tripped a cascade of secondary protocols, including a failsafe linked to Operation Starfall, a deep-water surveillance program so classified its existence was denied even within the highest echelons of naval intelligence. The files were meant to be digital dead ends, lost in a server graveyard off the coast of Iceland. But someone had just rattled the lock. When I arrived at the Regional Command Center, a discreet building nestled in the Presidio of San Francisco, the atmosphere was electric with controlled panic. Commander Anya Volkov, head of West Coast Cybersecurity, met me in a soundproof briefing room. She was a formidable woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't offer a greeting, just a curt nod as the door sealed behind me. "Admiral," she began, her voice crisp, "we have a Tier 1 security incident. An unauthorized attempt to access a legacy profile tied to your former designation." "I'm aware, Commander," I replied, my voice steady. "And I can assure you, it wasn't me." "With respect, Admiral, that's not enough," she said, her arms crossed. The query triggered a marker for Starfall. "That's not a file we can afford to have disturbed." I didn't react. "I designed the security protocols for Starfall." Her expression flickered. "Which makes your potential involvement all the more concerning." We held each other's gaze for a long moment, a silent duel of wills. I broke it by leaning forward slightly, my hands resting on the cool surface of the conference table. "I'm not here to be interrogated, Commander. I'm here to help you contain this. Give me full access to the diagnostic logs. I'll find the source of the breach myself." Her eyes narrowed. "You want to lead the investigation into a breach of your own legacy clearance?" "No," I said softly. "I want to find out who just tried to resurrect a ghost, and more importantly, why they knew exactly which tombstone to push on." There was a tense pause. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, she acquiesced. I walked out with a temporary administrative key, giving me unrestricted access to the network's deepest diagnostic layers and a 48-hour window to solve the puzzle before it was escalated to the Joint Chiefs. I already had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. Back in my secure hotel room, I ran a deep trace on the metadata from the access point. The digital signature was faint, amateurish, but it was there. It originated from the small, slate-gray reader I had given Isolde. A knot tightened in my stomach. She had no concept of what she had done, no idea of the sleeping dragon whose tail she had just tweaked. But the system didn't care about intent. It only cared about exposure. And in this world, exposure was a contagion that could jeopardize active operations and endanger lives. My first duty was to report her. It was the clear, unequivocal requirement of my position. But I didn't. Instead, I opened a secure, peer-to-peer channel to Chief Vance, one of the few people I trusted implicitly, a man who understood that sometimes the official record didn't tell the whole story. I composed a brief, carefully worded message requesting all network traffic logs from the barracks on the night of the incident, along with any archived firewall data he might have kept off-network. At the end of the message, I added a single, cryptic line. This was not a random act of curiosity. I believe someone was fishing, and they used my sister as bait. I hit send and sat back, watching the lights of the Golden Gate Bridge flicker in the distance, waiting for the storm to make landfall. The server room at the Presidio was kept at a constant, chilly temperature, the hum of the cooling fans a monotonous drone against the silence. I'd been granted a provisional command post for the investigation, a courtesy to my rank that felt more like a leash. But I didn't need their trust. I needed their hardware, and I had it. Chief Vance stood beside me, a silent, solid presence. He hadn't asked for details, and I hadn't offered any. His loyalty was to the integrity of the service, and for now his instincts told him that meant trusting me. I worked backward through the code, peeling away layers of encrypted logs until I found it, the faint digital fingerprint I was looking for. The Starfall archive hadn't been downloaded, just accessed, a quick, shallow query that was enough to trip the alarm, but not to steal the data. The signal was unmistakable. It came from the device I had given Isolde. I didn't storm into her life with accusations. I sent a simple, official summons. When she entered the briefing room, her posture was ramrod straight, her expression a mixture of apprehension and defiance. Her eyes darted from me to Vance, who offered a brief, neutral nod. I gestured to the chair across from the console. "Sit down, Isolde." She sat, her hands clenched in her lap. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You don't need to explain why you did it. But you do need to understand the consequences. The device you used is linked to a legacy clearance of the highest level. By accessing it, you crossed a line that, officially, constitutes an act of espionage." Isolde's face went pale. The defiance drained away, replaced by a dawning horror. This is no longer a family matter, I continued, my voice even and low. From this moment on, you are either a cooperating asset in a federal investigation, or you are its primary subject. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft whir of a nearby processor. Then, in a voice so quiet, I almost didn't recognize it, she asked, "Admiral, it's real, isn't it?" I didn't answer her question directly. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "You never said a word. Not to me, not to anyone. I had to know who you were. The part of you we were never allowed to see." My reply was softer than I intended. Sometimes, Isolde, the only way to protect the people you love is to let them see you as someone you're not. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, there was no argument, no defense. I made a decision. I wasn't going to report her. Instead, I told her, "You're going to stay here. And you're going to help me find out who led you to that door." Vance watched the exchange, his arms still folded across his broad chest. His silence was not approval, but it wasn't condemnation either. "If she compromises this investigation, Admiral," he stated, his voice a low rumble, "it will be the end of both of your careers. You know that." "I do," I said. And so, we became an unlikely trio, bound by a fragile, unspoken truce. We spent the next 18 hours digging through terabytes of data, tracing packet routes, and searching for the ghost in the machine. And then we found it. The server that had relayed the initial query from Isolde's device showed signs of a deep, dormant infection, a sophisticated malware script implanted nearly 5 years earlier, hidden within a routine software update. I recognized the digital signature, the elegant, vicious style of the code. It belonged to a former NSA analyst named Adrian Thorne. He'd been discharged after a disastrous joint operation in the South China Sea. The official reason was a breach of protocol. The unofficial rumor was that he'd sold operational intelligence to a private military contractor. He disappeared before the investigation could be completed, but it seemed he'd left a digital landmine behind. We leaned back from the terminals, the pieces falling into place with a sickening click. "This wasn't an accident," Vance muttered, his eyes dark. "He planted that worm years ago," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He was waiting for someone with the right name and the wrong clearance to stumble into his trap." Isolde didn't just find a file. She stepped on a tripwire he set for me. On the walk back to the temporary quarters, Vance broke the heavy silence. "There was an incident 2 years ago," he said, his gaze fixed on the sterile corridor ahead. "A research vessel, the Wanderer, lost power in a squall off the Aleutians. 22 souls on board, mostly civilian scientists. Command said the storm was too severe for a rescue op, ordered all assets to stand down." He paused. "Your sister was on duty at the Juneau station. She heard the distress call. She misinterpreted the stand-down order." Isolde, walking beside me, froze. She coordinated a long-shot rescue with a Canadian fishing trawler, guiding them through the storm via satellite comms. No official support, no authorization. Just her and a radio. He glanced at Isolde. "She saved all 22 of them. Got a formal reprimand for it, one that will follow her for the rest of her career." He then looked at me, a new understanding in his eyes. He saw the same quiet defiance, the same willingness to choose people over protocol. He saw the sister I had never known. Back in the briefing room, we stared at the final line of the traceback report. Malware origin node, server Delta, 7. Last admin access, A. Thorne. Current status, active. The game had changed. This was no longer about a simple breach. It was about an old enemy who had just stepped out of the shadows, using my sister to pull me back into the light he wanted to extinguish. The low, persistent hum of the command center was a familiar symphony of tension. Daylight was a distant concept in this windowless, climate-controlled world, where time was measured in data packets and server refresh rates. Isolde sat at a secondary terminal, her focus absolute, her earlier fear replaced by a steely resolve. Vance stood watch by the sealed entrance, a silent guardian. "You want to understand, Thorn?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the main screen. "You want to know why this is more than just a ghost from my past?" Isolde nodded, her jaw tight. I pulled up a heavily redacted mission file, one that had been sealed for 5 years. "Operation Nightwater," I began, my voice low. "South China Sea. Our objective was to monitor and disable a network of illegal underwater listening posts set up by a rogue state. Thorn was our lead data analyst. He was brilliant, fast, but he lacked a moral compass. He saw people, assets, and data as interchangeable pieces on a chessboard." I pointed to a highlighted section of the report. "We located the central hub for the listening posts on a small, uninhabited atoll. But our long-range sensors detected a civilian fishing vessel that had strayed into the area, its engine disabled. Standard protocol was to abort, warn them off, and reschedule." Thorn argued against it. He saw the vessel as acceptable collateral damage. He wanted to proceed with the mission knowing they were there? Isolde's voice was incredulous. "He did more than that," I said, the memory still cold and sharp. "He falsified the sensor data, logging the vessel as a non-biological anomaly, and pushed the mission forward. I caught the discrepancy just minutes before the operation was set to commence. I countermanded his order and filed a report. The room was silent. Even the servers seemed to hold their breath. My report triggered the investigation that led to his discharge," I finished. "He lost everything. His career, his clearance, his future. And he has spent every day since then blaming me. So he planted the malware." Isolde pieced it together, her voice thick with realization. "As a trap. Waiting for someone close to you to trigger it." "He didn't just want to find me," I clarified. "He wanted to destroy me. By luring you in, he could make it look like I was the one trying to access a sensitive file through a family member. He wanted to frame me, to finish the job he started 5 years ago." As if on cue, a klaxon blared softly, and the main monitor flashed with a new alert. It wasn't a simple breach this time. It was a full-scale digital assault. The malware, now fully activated, was tearing through the network's firewalls, targeting not just archived data, but active command and control systems for unmanned oceanic drones. It was a phantom fleet, and Thorn was trying to seize the helm. The implication was terrifying. He could send these drones into foreign waters, simulate an attack, and create an international incident, with all the digital breadcrumbs leading directly back to my legacy clearance. He wasn't just trying to ruin my career, he was trying to use my ghost to start a war. An encrypted message flashed on Volkov's personal terminal. "Effective immediately, Admiral Reyes's network access is revoked. She is to be considered a person of interest and confined to quarters pending a full security review." I didn't even have time to react. I was being branded an internal threat. Vance swore under his breath. But it was Isolde who moved. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, and strode out of the room into the main operations center where Commander Volkov was directing the containment efforts. "It was me," Isolde announced, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the controlled chaos. "The initial breach. I did it. I used a device the Admiral gave me years ago. I was foolish, and I was curious, and I had no idea what I was doing." Every head in the room turned to her. Her eyes, filled with a fire I had never seen before, found mine across the room. "I spent years thinking my sister was weak because she walked away," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "I was wrong. She wasn't walking away from a challenge. She was walking toward a different one, a silent one, and she did it alone because people like me weren't willing to listen." A profound silence settled over the operations floor. For the first time, I felt the ice around my own heart begin to thaw. She saw me. She finally, truly saw me. Then the main screen flared red again. The attack was escalating. Thorn, believing he had me cornered and discredited, was getting bolder. He was attempting to reroute a live drone, one on a sensitive patrol route. "This isn't over," I murmured. Revoked access or not, I knew this system better than the people who built it. I had designed its secret passages, its emergency hatches. I moved to an auxiliary terminal, one used for diagnostics, and plugged in the small, stone-like communicator from my pocket. It contained a ghost key, a failsafe I had built into the network's core programming, a backdoor only I knew existed. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, inputting a sequence of commands that bypassed the main security protocols. The screen split into two windows, one showing the real drone network, the other a perfect, mirrored decoy. I created a phantom command structure, a digital ghost ship for him to board. The virus, programmed to seek out and hijack the drone control system, immediately latched onto the decoy. I saw his remote IP address flicker to life on my screen. He had taken the bait. In his arrogance, he had exposed his own location. "Got you," I whispered. The signal traced back to a small, private marina in Oakland. Vance didn't need an order. On our way. Within minutes, a Coast Guard tactical team, working with local law enforcement, descended on the marina. They found Thorne in the cabin of a small, unassuming sailboat, surrounded by a web of monitors and hard drives. He didn't resist. As they led him away in cuffs, he looked past the officers and saw me standing on the pier. A bitter, knowing smirk twisted his lips. "You think your quiet integrity can save you?" he sneered. "You should have stayed a ghost, Reyes. No one wants a saint in the shadows." I stepped forward until I was close enough for only him to hear. "Ghosts don't build back doors," I said softly. "They haunt them." His smirk faltered. He was finished. And, for the first time in a very long time, I felt something more profound than relief. I felt a quiet, powerful sense of peace, like the calm that follows a storm at sea. The hearing room was paneled in dark, polished wood that seemed to absorb both light and sound, creating a heavy, solemn atmosphere. It wasn't a court-martial, but a formal board of inquiry convened at the highest level of the Department of Homeland Security. Seated behind a long, imposing table were a rear admiral from Naval Intelligence, Commander Volkov, and two senior civilian officials. Their faces were impassive, their gazes analytical. Isolde sat beside me, her posture straight, her uniform immaculate. Vance stood near the witness lectern, a silent, formidable presence. Adrian Thorne, dressed in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, had already given his testimony, weaving a masterful tale of manipulation and betrayal. He presented doctored logs and fabricated emails, painting me as a disgruntled, rogue officer using my own sister to access classified files for personal gain. "As you can see from this communications log," Thorne said, his voice smooth and reasonable, "Admiral Reyes was attempting to expose and sabotage Operation Nightwater, an operation she fundamentally disagreed with, putting national security at risk for her own misplaced moral objections." The Rear Admiral turned his cool, assessing gaze on me. "Admiral Reyes, your response?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't present a passionate defense. I simply placed a small, encrypted data chip on the table. "This contains the original, unredacted sensor logs from Operation Nightwater," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It will show that Mr. Thorne deliberately falsified the data to erase the presence of a civilian vessel in the operational theater. He didn't just breach protocol, he was willing to sacrifice innocent lives for a successful mission report." A ripple of quiet shock passed through the room. Then Vance stepped forward. "Permission to present corroborating evidence," he said. At a nod from the board, he played a short, clean audio file. It was my voice, 5 years younger, but just as clear, from the Nightwater comms channel. "Hold the deployment. I have an unverified vessel in the zone. I repeat, hold deployment until we can confirm it is not a civilian target." There it was. The moment I had put my career on the line, the truth Thorne had tried so desperately to bury. His composure finally cracked. A muscle jumped in his jaw. But the final blow didn't come from me. Isolde stood, holding a printed log of network activity. This shows access to the Trace and Petaluma server from an external IP address that matches a device registered to Mr. Thorne, 3 days before I ever touched the Admiral's reader. He wasn't just waiting for a trap to be sprung. He actively baited it, pushing a corrupted file into the guest network where he knew I, or another cadet, would eventually stumble upon it. The case crumbled. The deception was laid bare. The board deliberated for less than 20 minutes. The charges against me were summarily dismissed, my full clearance and command status reinstated. Thorne was handed over to federal authorities to face a litany of charges, from espionage to conspiracy. As the inquiry concluded, one of the civilian officials looked at me, a hint of awe in his eyes. "Admiral, the file on Nightwater shows you were recommended for the Distinguished Service Medal for your actions. The recommendation was lost. We would like to rectify that. Publicly." I looked at the faces around the table, and then at Isolde. I thought of my old team, scattered to the winds, living quiet lives built on the foundation of our shared silence. "With all due respect, sir," I said, "some actions are not for medals. They are for the quiet knowledge that you did the right thing when no one was looking. My name would not be cleared in the headlines. My story would not be told in a press release. And that was the only victory I had ever wanted." As we walked out of the hearing room, into the bright, indifferent light of the hallway, Isolde turned to me. "I get it now," she said softly. "Honor isn't about the uniform you wear. It's about the choices you make when you're the only one who knows you're making them." A week later, I stood on the main stage at the National Maritime Security Symposium in Washington, D.C. The hall was filled with over 1,000 people, uniformed officers, intelligence analysts, academics, and policymakers. My dress uniform was simple, adorned with no ribbons, no medals. The screen behind me was blank. I didn't start with my title or a summary of my career. I started with a story. "There is a kind of courage that is never celebrated," I began, my voice carrying through the silent auditorium. "It's the courage of the quiet choice. The decision to hold fire. The decision to speak up when it costs you everything. The decision to remain silent when it protects someone else. This courage doesn't come with a citation. Its only reward is the integrity of the act itself." I spoke of the sea, of its vastness and its secrets, of the ghosts of ships and missions that lie in its depths. I never mentioned Nightwater or Starfall or Thorne by name. I spoke only of the principles, of the moral currents that guide a true leader through the darkest waters. In the front row, Isolde sat listening, not in her uniform, but in simple civilian clothes. In her hands, she held a proposal she had written, a new training module for cadets on digital ethics and the moral hazards of modern intelligence work, using a redacted, anonymized version of our story as its core case study. As I finished, a standing ovation filled the hall, a wave of sound and respect. But my eyes were on my sister, who simply nodded, a look of profound, shared understanding on her face. Later, as I was leaving, Commander Volkov stopped me. She handed me a sealed envelope. "The official, public commendation for Nightwater," she said. The secretary insisted. "It's your choice whether to accept it." I held the envelope for a moment, the weight of it both heavy and hollow. Then I handed it back. "My team from that operation deserves to keep their peace more than I deserve a piece of metal," I said. "Let the file remain sealed." On the flight back to the West Coast, I received a text from Isolde. It was a single line, "You're not a ghost, Serafina. You're a lighthouse." And I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. I didn't need a stage. I didn't need a medal. I just needed to know that the light I had so carefully shielded for all these years had finally helped someone else find their way home. The tarmac at the small Astoria Regional Airport was windswept and empty, the sky a familiar, brooding gray. I was preparing to leave again, this time for a long-term assignment in the Arctic, another quiet mission far from the public eye. As I walked toward the small government jet, I saw a figure waiting for me. It was Isolde, her hair pulled back, her posture relaxed. She didn't say much. She just handed me a small, flat box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a simple, framed photograph. It was a picture of the two of us, taken last week, standing on the pier in San Francisco, the fog rolling in behind us. We were both smiling. "For the empty spot on the mantelpiece," she said, her voice soft. She didn't salute me. Instead, she hugged me, a firm, warm embrace that spoke more than any words or military custom ever could. "Be safe, Serafina," she whispered. "You too, Lieutenant," I whispered back. As the jet climbed into the clouds, leaving the familiar coastline behind, I held the photograph in my hands. I thought about the years of silence, the perceived failures, the unspoken resentments. They weren't scars anymore. They were just part of the journey, the deep, unseen currents that had finally brought me to this shore. Honor, I realized, isn't found in the thunder of applause. It's found in the quiet whisper of your own conscience, telling you that you stayed true to your course, even when the sea was dark and the stars were hidden. True strength doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be